When a boy is kicked out of the system at 16, with nothing but a key to a dusty, forgotten feed store, he thinks his life is over. What he discovers inside, buried under years of neglect, won't just give him a future, it will completely rewrite his past. If you've ever felt lost, or like the world has forgotten you, I need you to listen. This is a story about finding your way back, and I want you to be here for it. The day I turned 16 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state was concerned. There was no cake. There were no cards. There was just Ms. Albright, my caseworker for the last 4 years, standing in the doorway of my room at the group home. She held a manila envelope, and her expression was the same one she wore for every difficult conversation. A careful, practiced neutrality that was somehow colder than outright anger. "Leo," she said, her voice flat. "Happy birthday. Pack your things." That was it. 2 years of waiting lists. 2 years of being shuffled between temporary placements after my grandpa died, and 4 years in this specific home, a place I'd learned to navigate with the quiet invisibility of a ghost. And it all ended with that one sentence. Packing didn't take long. My things fit into a single black duffel bag that had been issued to me upon arrival. A few changes of clothes, a worn-out paperback, a toothbrush, the sum total of my life. I zipped the bag and slung it over my shoulder. The room already looked like I'd never been there. The narrow bed was stripped, the thin mattress exposed. The small desk was bare. It was a blank space, waiting for the next forgotten kid to fill it. I followed Ms. Albright down the hallway, the linoleum floor sticky under my worn-out sneakers. The other boys watched me go, their faces a mixture of envy and fear. They knew the drill. Aging out was the finish line nobody wanted to cross. It meant you were on your own, a ship cut loose from its mooring in the middle of a storm. "Where am I going?" I asked, my voice raspy. I hadn't used it much that morning. "There's a legal matter to attend to," she said, not looking at me. "Your grandfather's estate." I stopped. His what? He didn't have anything. We had nothing. That was the story I'd been told, the one that had settled into my bones. My grandpa, Arthur, was a good man, a kind man who smelled of sawdust and soil, but he was a poor man. When he got sick, there was no money, no resources. The state stepped in, and I was swept away. He died a few months later, alone in a hospital I wasn't allowed to visit. "Apparently he had a property," Ms. Albright continued, pushing open the heavy front door. The sudden blast of cold November air made me flinch. "A lawyer has been trying to contact you. Since you're 16 now, you're eligible to inherit. The state's guardianship is terminated." She said terminated, like she was talking about a pest. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and final. I was a problem that had been solved, a file to be stamped closed and shoved into a deep, dark cabinet. We got into her drab sedan, the engine complaining as it turned over. The car smelled faintly of stale coffee and disappointment. We drove in silence through the city, the gray buildings blurring past the window. I felt a strange numbness creeping over me. It was the feeling I got whenever the world became too big, too loud. A kind of internal retreat, a pulling down of the shades. The lawyer's office was downtown, in a building that tried to look important, but was just old and tired. The name on the glass door read Davies and Associates, Legal Services. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. A man who I assumed was Mr. Davies stood up from behind a massive wooden desk. He was older, with a fringe of white hair and a kind, weary face. He looked at me, then at Ms. Albright, and a flicker of something, pity, maybe crossed his eyes. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I'm Robert Davies. I was your grandfather's attorney. He gestured to a worn leather chair. I sat. Miss Albright remained standing by the door, a sentinel guarding the border between my past and my future. "I've been holding this for you," Mr. Davies said, sliding the same type of manila envelope across the desk. This one felt heavier, more substantial than the States version. "Your grandfather, Arthur, made his final arrangements with me shortly before he passed. He was very specific about the terms." I just stared at the envelope. My hands felt clumsy, too big. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Mr. Davies seemed to understand. "He left you his property. It's a commercial building in a town called Harmony Creek. He owned it outright, no mortgage." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It's a feed and grain store. Hasn't been operational for some time, I'm afraid." A feed store. I tried to picture it, but all I could summon was the image of my grandpa's hands, calloused, dirt-caked, but always so gentle when he'd fix a toy for me or ruffle my hair. He'd worked odd jobs, mostly farm labor and carpentry. I never knew he owned a whole building. "Why didn't I know?" I whispered. "Why was I in the system if he had a place?" Mr. Davies sighed, a long, slow sound. He looked over at Miss Albright, who offered a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A silent conversation I wasn't privy to. "Your grandfather's situation was complicated, Leo. The property wasn't generating income. In fact, it was a liability. There were back taxes owed, significant ones. At the time of his illness, his legal ownership of an asset, even a non-performing one, disqualified him from certain state aid programs. And it complicated your status as a dependent. It was all legal jargon, a language designed to build walls. But I understood the core of it. The store, this supposed inheritance, was the very thing that had separated us. It was the reason I'd ended up alone. A bitter, metallic taste filled my mouth. "So I get a broken-down store and a tax bill?" I said, the numbness starting to give way to a cold, familiar anger. "That's it?" "The back taxes have been an ongoing issue," Mr. Davies admitted. "But there's more. Inside the envelope, you'll find the deed, a key, a bus ticket to Harmony Creek, and a letter. From him." My breath caught in my chest. A letter. From Grandpa. "There's one other thing you need to be aware of," the lawyer continued, his tone becoming more cautious. "A development corporation, Vantage Point, has been trying to acquire properties on that block, including your grandfather's store. They've made a substantial offer." He slid another paper across the desk. It was a formal-looking document with a number on it. A very large number. Enough money to make my head spin. Enough to start over, to go anywhere, to be anyone. "Your grandfather refused to sell," Mr. Davies said quietly. "He was adamant. Now the offer is extended to you. As the new owner, the decision is yours. You can sell, pay the taxes, and walk away with a considerable sum. Or you can keep it." Ms. Albright finally spoke, her voice sharp. "He's 16, Robert. He should take the money. It's the only sensible option." Mr. Davies didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on me. "Your grandfather trusted you to make the right choice, Leo, whatever that may be. He said you were a good kid with a good heart. He said you'd know what to do." He pushed the thick envelope toward me again. This time, I took it. It felt warm, almost alive. Inside it, I could feel the sharp edges of a key. Ms. Albright drove me to the bus station. She didn't say much, just gave me a final cursory glance as I stood on the curb. "The bus leaves in 20 minutes. Good luck, Leo." And then she was gone, her car disappearing into traffic, officially washing the state's hands of me. I stood there for a long moment, the duffel bag digging into my shoulder, the envelope clutched in my hand. The city noise felt overwhelming, the screech of tires, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 100 conversations. I was an island, a boy on a concrete island, holding the ghost of a key and a promise from a dead man. The offer from Vantage Point felt like a lifeboat, a clean, easy escape. Take the money, forget the past, forget the decrepit store and the town with the ridiculously hopeful name. It was the sensible thing to do. Ms. Albright was right. But then I thought of Mr. Davies' words. He trusted you. He said you'd know what to do. I looked at the bus ticket. One way. To Harmony Creek. My choice, he'd said. For the first time in years, maybe ever, the choice was actually mine. I didn't know if I had a good heart, or if I'd know what to do. All I knew was that my grandfather had left me a letter, and I had to read it in the place where he wrote it. I walked into the station, away from the life I knew, and toward a dusty, forgotten building in a town I'd never seen. I didn't know it then, but I was walking toward home. The bus ride was a long, slow journey from one world to another. The sprawling gray cityscape gradually gave way to suburbs, then to stretches of highway flanked by thinning forests. The further we went, the more the land opened up. The sky seemed to get bigger, a vast, pale canvas stretching over fields of dormant cornstalks and lonely farmhouses. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window, watching the world unspool. The duffel bag was at my feet, the manila envelope resting on my lap like a sacred text. I resisted the urge to open it. The letter had to be read there, in the store. It felt like a rule I couldn't break. My fellow passengers were a quiet collection of souls. An old woman knitting a colorful scarf, her needles clicking a steady, peaceful rhythm. A young man in a worn-out work jacket, asleep with his mouth open. A mother trying to keep her 2 small children entertained with a picture book. They were all going somewhere, to people and places that were expecting them. I was going to a building, an empty, silent building that hadn't expected anyone in years. The feeling of being an outsider, so familiar in the group home, was just as potent here, surrounded by strangers on a bus rolling through the heartland. Dry, institutional humor was a survival skill I'd picked up. I found myself thinking that my entire life had been a series of uncomfortable seats. The plastic chairs in waiting rooms, the hard bench in the back of a police car that one time, the lumpy mattress at the home, and now this bus seat with a spring digging into my lower back. I wondered if inheriting a feed store came with a comfortable chair. It seemed unlikely. After what felt like an eternity, the bus slowed, its air brakes hissing. The driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "Harmony Creek. Next stop, Harmony Creek." I gathered my bag, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I was the only one who stood up. I walked to the front of the bus, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. The driver, a heavy-set man with a kind, tired face, glanced at me in the rear-view mirror. "This your stop, son?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Not much here," he said, not unkindly. "You visiting family?" "Something like that," I mumbled. The bus pulled over to the side of a 2-lane road. There was no station, just a simple wooden bench under a faded blue sign that read Harmony Creek, population 412. The driver opened the door, and a gust of wind, sharp and smelling of damp earth and distant wood smoke, swept into the bus. It was a clean smell, a real smell, so different from the city's exhaust fumes. "Take care now," the driver said as I stepped down onto the gravel shoulder. The door hissed shut behind me, and the bus pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking in the distance until they were gone. And then there was silence, a profound, unnerving silence. I stood there for a full minute, just listening. I could hear the wind rustling through the bare branches of the trees, the distant caw of a crow. That was it. The sheer emptiness of the soundscape was deafening. I looked around. Across the road was a small diner with a flickering neon sign that said, "Eat." Next to it, a gas station with old-fashioned pumps. Further down, a handful of storefronts, most of them dark. This was Main Street. This was Harmony Creek. My instructions from Mr. Davies' notes were simple. Arthur Vance Feed and Grain, 114 Main Street. I looked down the row of buildings. There, at the far end of the block, was a two-story building with a wide facade, wedged between a boarded-up barber shop and an empty lot. The paint, once probably a cheerful barn red, had peeled and faded to a blotchy, sun-bleached pink. Large, grimy windows flanked a set of wide double doors. Above them, in faded white letters, I could just make out the words, Vance Feed and Grain. My store. My inheritance. It looked even more derelict than I had imagined. The roof sagged in the middle, and a few shingles were missing. A bird had built a nest in the crook of the letter G. It looked like a place the world had passed by and forgotten. A wave of despair washed over me. Ms. Albright's voice echoed in my head. "Take the money. It's the only sensible option." The developer's offer felt like a tangible, solid thing compared to this wreck, this monument to failure. I crossed the quiet street, my footsteps sounding loud on the pavement. I walked the length of the short block, my duffel bag feeling heavier with each step. When I reached the store, I stopped and just stared. The windows were so coated in dust and grime that I couldn't see inside. A tattered closed sign, yellowed with age, hung crookedly in one of them. It was a tomb. My grandfather had left me a tomb. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, cold and solid in my palm. It felt ancient, like something out of a storybook. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and stepped up to the double doors. The lock was large and rusted. I had to jiggle the key, pushing it hard until it finally slid all the way in. It turned with a horrible, grating screech, the sound of metal yielding after years of stillness. I pulled one of the doors. It resisted, scraping against the warped wooden threshold. I had to put my shoulder into it, pushing with all my weight until it groaned open just enough for me to slip through. And then I was inside. The air was the first thing that hit me. It was thick, heavy, and absolutely still. It smelled of 100 things at once. Dry, dusty grain, old wood, the faint, sweet scent of hay, the metallic tang of rust, and something else, something I couldn't quite place, the smell of time itself, of years packed down into layers of dust. Sunlight struggled to pierce the filthy windows, cutting dusty golden shafts through the gloom. The interior was cavernous, much bigger than it looked from the outside. A long wooden counter ran along one wall, a vintage cash register sitting on it like a forgotten king on a dusty throne. Shelves lined the other walls, reaching up to the high ceiling. Most were empty, but some still held a few stray items. A small pile of burlap sacks, a rusted scoop, a single, lonely can of something with a faded label. The floor was wide, rough-hewn planks, coated in a thick blanket of dust that puffed up around my sneakers with every step. My footprints were the first to mark this ground in a very, very long time. In the center of the vast room stood large, empty bins where, I presumed, different kinds of feed and seed would have been kept. To the back, a wide doorway led into what looked like a warehouse area, and a narrow, steep staircase ascended to the second floor. It was a mess. It was a wreck. But it was also magnificent, in its own way. It was real. It was solid. It had history. I could feel the ghost of 1,000 conversations in this room, the echoes of farmers and townspeople coming in for supplies, my grandfather standing behind that counter. I ran my hand along the wooden countertop, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. Underneath, the wood was smooth, worn down by decades of use. I dropped my duffel bag by the door. This was it. This was the place. I walked to the center of the room, standing in a beam of dusty sunlight. It was time. I sat down right there, on the floor, the dust settling on my jeans. With trembling hands, I opened the manila envelope. Inside, just as Mr. Davies had said, were several documents. The deed to the property, crisp and official. A thin sheaf of papers that was the offer from Vantage Point Development. A menacing-looking official notice from the county about the property taxes, marked Final Notice. And at the very bottom, a thick, sealed envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper. My name, Leo, was written on the front in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the real inheritance. Not the building, not the money, not the debt. This. A final word from the person I had loved most in the world. I took a shaky breath, broke the seal, and began to read. The letter was long, several pages filled with his cramped, careful script. I had to squint in the dim light to make out the words. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for the path your life has taken. I know you must be angry. I know you must feel abandoned. Nothing could be further from the truth. Everything I did to protect you." I had to stop and read that line again. To protect you. From what? The state had told me he was destitute, unable to care for me. It was a simple, tragic story. But the letter in my hands promised a different one. "About a year before I got sick," he wrote, "things in Harmony Creek started to change. A big development company from the city, Vantage Point, started buying up land. They wanted the whole block, this block. They wanted to tear it all down and build luxury condos or a shopping center, something soulless and ugly. They made offers to everyone. Most people took the money. The town was already struggling, and it was an easy way out. But this store, this was my father's store, and his father's before him. It's been in our family for nearly 100 years. It's more than just a building, Leo. It's our story. I refuse to sell." I looked around the dusty, cavernous room. 100 years. My story. The thought was so alien it barely registered. I had always believed my story began and ended with me. a solitary footnote. They didn't like that, the letter continued. They wanted the whole block or nothing. My store was the linchpin. They started putting pressure on me. First, it was just phone calls, friendly offers. Then the offers got bigger. When I still said no, things got unpleasant. Anonymous complaints to the county about code violations, tax audits. They tried to use the system to break me. They are powerful people, Leo. Ruthless. Around that time, my health started to fail. The doctors told me it was serious. I knew I didn't have long, and I knew I couldn't fight them and take care of you at the same time. They were already using the system against me. I was terrified of what they might do if they saw you as a point of leverage, a way to force my hand. A cold dread trickled down my spine. This wasn't a story about poverty. This was a story about a fight. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I did the one thing I knew would keep you safe from them, at least for a while. I created a situation where the state would have to step in. I let them think I was broke, that I couldn't manage. I let them take you. It broke my heart every single day you were gone, but I told myself it was the only way. The only way to put you somewhere they couldn't touch you, while I tried to sort out this mess. I thought I'd have more time. I thought I could beat them, fix this, and come get you. But the sickness was faster than I was. I had to put the letter down. Tears were blurring the words. All those years I had spent feeling thrown away, a piece of trash my own grandfather couldn't be bothered with. All that anger, all that resentment, it had all been built on a lie. Not his lie. A story I had been told, a story I had told myself. He hadn't abandoned me. He had hidden me. I cried. I sat there on the dusty floor of a forgotten feed store in the middle of nowhere, and I cried for the first time in years. Not quiet, choked-back tears, but deep, ragged sobs that tore through my chest. I cried for the little boy who was taken from his home. I cried for the teenager who had learned to be hard and silent because he thought no one in the world cared. And I cried for my grandfather, who had died alone, fighting a battle I never knew existed, all for me. It felt like a dam breaking, years of pent-up grief and confusion flooding out of me. The dust motes danced in the sunbeams, indifferent. The old building stood silent, holding the space for my sorrow. When the tears finally subsided, I was left feeling hollowed out, raw, but also strangely clean. The heavy weight of that old anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching sadness, but also a flicker of something else, a connection, a purpose. After a while, I picked up the letter again. My hands were shaking. "Now, you're in a difficult position, son," he wrote. "Vantage Point will come for you. They'll see a kid, alone and scared, and they'll think you're an easy mark. They'll offer you a fortune. And maybe taking that money is the right thing for you. It would give you a start in life I could never provide. There is no shame in that choice. It's your life, and you have to live it. But I want you to know what you'd be giving up." He went on to describe the history of the store, how my great-grandfather had built it with his own hands, how it had survived the Depression, how it had been the heart of the community for generations. He wrote about his own dreams for it, plans he'd had to modernize it, to turn the upstairs apartment into a home for us. A home. "Under the third floorboard to the left of the counter," the letter concluded, "you'll find a metal box. I saved what I could over the years. It's not a fortune, not like the developer's money, but it might be enough. Enough for the back taxes, enough to get the lights turned on, enough for a start. The choice is yours, Leo. You can take their money and walk away into a new life, or you can take my money and try to reclaim an old one. Whatever you do, know that I loved you more than anything. Know that I was and always will be proud of you. Your grandpa, Arthur. I folded the letter, my fingers tracing his name. A choice. The harder right over the easier wrong. That's what this was. I looked at the offer from vantage point, the numbers swimming before my eyes. Life-changing money, security, freedom, everything I'd never had. Then I looked around the decaying store. A money pit, a burden, a ghost. But it was our ghost. I stood up, my legs stiff. I walked over to the counter and knelt down. I counted the floorboards. 1, 2, 3 to the left. The board looked just like the others, but when I pressed on the edge, it gave slightly. I dug my fingers into the crack and pulled. It came up with a low groan, revealing a dark, square hole beneath. And inside, just as he'd said, was a dull gray metal box. It was heavy. I lifted it out and set it on the counter, the metal cold against the dusty wood. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in neat, tight bundles, was cash. Stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s held together with rubber bands. And on top of the money, another, smaller envelope. I opened it. Inside was a receipt from the county tax office. It was a partial payment he'd made on the tax bill, dated just a week before he died. He'd been fighting until the very end. I didn't count the money. I didn't need to. It wasn't about the amount. It was about what it represented. It was hope. It was a weapon. It was his last stand, passed on to me. My phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with the last of my cash from odd jobs, buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer. The number was unknown. Curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Am I speaking with Leo Vance?" The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, and dripping with false sincerity. "Who's asking?" "My name is Mark Trask. I'm a representative for Vantage Point Development. I believe our legal team sent you an offer regarding a property on Main Street in Harmony Creek." My blood ran cold. They were already moving. "I got it," I said. "Excellent," he said, his voice brightening. "It's a very generous offer, as I'm sure you'll agree. A young man like you, that kind of money could set you up for life. College, a car, a place of your own, no more worries." He made it sound so simple, so clean. I looked at my grandfather's letter. I looked at the box of money on the counter. I looked around the vast, silent room, at the dust motes dancing in the light. This place wasn't just a building. It was a story. It was a battlefield. And my grandfather hadn't raised a soldier just to have him surrender before the first shot was fired. "We'd like to close as soon as possible," Trask continued, his voice oozing confidence. "We can have the paperwork couriered to you tomorrow. All you have to do is sign." I took a deep breath. For the first time, the air in the store didn't feel heavy and old. It felt like potential. "The property is not for sale," I said. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, his smooth script thrown off course. I don't think you understand, son," he said, his tone shifting, the faux friendliness replaced by a sharp edge of impatience. "This is a significant sum of money. We're talking about a life-changing opportunity here. You're sitting on a dilapidated, worthless building. It's not worthless to me, I said, and the strength in my own voice surprised me. It was a voice I didn't recognize. It was the voice of Arthur Vance's grandson. And it's not for sale. Not now, not ever. Do not contact me again. Before he could respond, I ended the call. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline, from defiance. I had made my choice. I wasn't taking the easy way out. I was staying. I was fighting. I looked at the box of money. The first battle was the tax bill. I pulled out the menacing final notice. There was a phone number for the county treasurer's office. I dialed. A tired-sounding woman answered. I explained who I was, gave her the property number. I could hear her typing. "Oh, yes," she said, her voice filled with a kind of weary sympathy. "The old Vance feed store. That's a very large delinquency, honey. It's scheduled for the county auction in 2 weeks if it's not paid in full." 2 weeks. They had pushed me to the absolute brink. "I want to pay it," I said. "All of it. Right now." There was another pause. "All of it?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "That's a substantial amount." She quoted the number, and it made my stomach clench. It would take most of what was in the box. "I have it," I said. "How can I pay?" She explained the process for a wire transfer. I wrote down the details on the back of the tax notice. After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment in the quiet. The first step was taken. It was terrifying. It was reckless. But it felt right. It felt like honoring him. I knew this was just the beginning. Paying the taxes just bought me time. The building was still a wreck. The roof sagged, the windows were broken, and there was no power or water. Vantage Point wouldn't give up so easily. They'd find other ways to pressure me, just like they did with my grandfather. This was going to be a long, hard fight, a war of attrition. But as I stood there, in the quiet gloom of my family's legacy, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt anchored. For the first time in my life, I had a place. I had a purpose. I wasn't just a file in a cabinet or a number in the system. I was Leo Vance, owner of the Vance Feed and Grain, and I was home. The next morning, I woke up on a pile of dusty burlap sacks. It was the most uncomfortable bed I'd ever slept on. But the strange thing was, I had slept. Deeply. For the first time since I could remember, I didn't dream of hallways or slamming doors or the faces of strangers. I woke up to the sight of the sun, a little brighter now, streaming through the grimy windows, and the sound of my own breathing in the vast, quiet space. My first order of business was the wire transfer. I found the local bank Mr. Davies had mentioned in his notes. Walking down Main Street in the morning light was a different experience. The town was still quiet, but it was alive. A pickup truck rumbled past, the driver giving me a curious nod. The "Eat" sign at the diner was off, but I could see someone moving around inside. Harmony Creek wasn't a ghost town. It was just sleeping. The bank teller was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a nameplate that read, Doris. She looked at me, then at the pile of cash I placed on the counter, with unconcealed suspicion. "That's a lot of cash for a boy your age," she said, her tone flat. "It's an inheritance," I said, sliding the tax notice and the wire transfer information toward her. "I'm paying the back taxes on the old feed store. I'm Arthur Vance's grandson." Her expression softened instantly. "Arthur's boy?" she said, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. Well, I'll be. We were all so sorry to hear about him. He was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. She looked at the tax form. So you're the one who's taking on the old place, and standing up to those vantage point vultures, I hear. News traveled fast in a town of 412 people. I'm trying, I said. She processed the transfer with a new efficiency, her movements crisp and purposeful. It's about time someone did, she muttered, stamping the receipt. Arthur held out for as long as he could. This town needs more people like him. She handed me the stamped receipt. It felt like a medal. Good luck, son. If you need anything, you come see me. Walking out of that bank, I felt a foot taller. I had an ally. A small thing, maybe, but it felt huge. The rest of the day was a blur of hard physical labor. I started with the most basic task, letting in the light. I found a bucket, a squeegee, and a rag in a back closet. The water wasn't on yet, so I used my own drinking water, bottle by bottle, to clean the front windows. As the years of grime dissolved and washed away, it was like the store was opening its eyes. The interior was flooded with clear, bright sunlight, revealing the true scale of the place, the beauty of the old wood floors and the high, pressed tin ceiling. It also revealed the true scale of the mess. Dust lay over everything like a shroud. I found a push broom with a handle as smooth as glass from years of use. My grandfather's broom. I started at the back and began to sweep. It was a massive undertaking. The dust was so thick it was like sweeping fine sand. It billowed up in great choking clouds that caught in the sunbeams, making the air sparkle. I had to tie a t-shirt over my face to breathe. I swept for hours, my arms and back aching, pushing a rolling wave of history. Dust, chaff, forgotten receipts, a few stray pennies, toward the front doors. By late afternoon, the main floor was clear. The wood, now visible, was scarred and stained, but it was solid, strong. I felt a ridiculous surge of pride just looking at it. I had done something. I had made a mark. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since the bus ride. I walked over to the diner. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful welcome. The place was warm and smelled of coffee and fried bacon. A handful of older men sat at the counter, nursing mugs of coffee. A woman with a tired but friendly face stood behind it, wiping it down with a cloth. "Just one?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." I slid onto a stool at the counter. "What can I get for you?" "A burger and a coffee, please." She got to work, her movements efficient and practiced. The men at the counter watched me with open curiosity. "You're the Vance boy, ain't you?" one of them finally asked. He was a farmer by the looks of him, weathered face, calloused hands. "Yes, sir. Leo." "Heard you told that developer fella to take a hike," another one chimed in, a grin splitting his face. "Good on you." The woman placed the burger in front of me. It was perfect. "On the house," she said quietly. "Welcome home." I was so taken aback I couldn't speak for a moment. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I ate the burger, listening to the low murmur of conversation around me. They were talking about crop prices, the weather, the high school football team. Normal things. For the first time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was just a boy eating a burger in his hometown diner. The feeling was so new, so fragile, I was almost afraid to breathe. The next few weeks fell into a routine. I'd wake up with the sun, work in the store until my body screamed, then head to the diner for my one meal of the day. I tackled the upstairs apartment next. It was a bigger mess than the store, filled with my grandfather's personal effects, frozen in time. Old furniture under white sheets, boxes of books, clothes still hanging in the closet. It was like walking through a museum of a life, his life. It was emotionally brutal. Every object was a connection, a memory. I found his favorite coffee mug, a chipped blue thing. I found a framed photo of a much younger him, standing proudly in front of the store, with a woman who must have been my grandmother. And me, a tiny kid, sitting on his shoulders. I didn't even remember the picture being taken. In a desk drawer, I found stacks of notebooks, his journals. They were filled with his thoughts, his worries about the store, his anger at the developers. But mostly they were filled with me. Pages and pages about my first words, my first steps, funny things I'd said. He'd written down his heartbreak after I was taken, his hopes for my future. It was a testament of his love, written in cheap ink on lined paper. Reading them, I felt his presence so strongly it was like he was in the room with me, a guiding hand on my shoulder. I also found the rejection letters, dozens of them. He had applied for small business loans, historical preservation grants, anything he could think of to get the money to fix up the store and fight back. They had all said no. He had been fighting alone. The work was slow and grueling. I hauled out load after load of trash. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees. I patched a hole in the roof with tar I bought from the local hardware store, whose owner, a man named Sal, gave me a discount after he heard what I was doing. Every small victory, every clean corner, felt like a reclamation. I wasn't just cleaning a building, I was clearing a space for a future, my future. One afternoon, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the store. A man in an expensive suit got out. It was Mark Trask from Vantage Point. My stomach tightened. He walked right up to the open doors, a predatory smile on his face. "Quite the project you've got here, Leo," he said, looking around the half-clean store with disdain. "I have to admire your enthusiasm." "What do you want?" I asked, standing my ground, broom in hand. "I came to make you a new offer," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "A much better one. I think you'll find this number persuasive. Let's be realistic. You can't win. This building is condemned. It's a matter of time. We'll get it one way or another. This is your last chance to walk away with something." He was trying to intimidate me, to make me feel small and powerless, just a kid in over his head. A month ago it would have worked, but a month ago I hadn't read my grandfather's letters. I hadn't felt the support of a town I was just getting to know. I looked him straight in the eye. "I already gave you my answer." His smile vanished. "You're making a big mistake, kid." "No," I said, and I gestured around the store, at the clean floors and the bright sunlight streaming in. "I'm building something. You should try it sometime. It feels better than tearing things down." He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mask of cold fury. Then, without another word, he turned, got back in his car, and sped away. I knew it wasn't the end, but I had won the battle. That evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the floor, I stood in the middle of the store. It was still a long way from being finished. It was still just a shell, but it was my shell. I had paid the debt. I had faced the enemy. I had started the work. I thought about the word inheritance. I used to think it just meant money or property, something you get when someone dies. But I was wrong. My grandfather hadn't just left me a building. He had left me a choice. He had left me a history to be proud of. He had left me a fight worth fighting. He had left me a chance to build a home, not with money, but with my own 2 hands. I looked up at the high ceiling, at the faint outline of the pressed tin patterns under the dust. I had so much to do. I had to get the utilities turned on, finish the apartment so I could stop sleeping on burlap sacks, figure out what to do with the store itself. Could it be a feed store again? Or something new? The questions were huge, daunting, but for the first time in my life, they were exciting. They were my questions to answer. I thought about all the other kids like me, the ones who aged out of the system with nothing but a duffel bag and a future as blank and terrifying as an empty room. They didn't have a grandfather who left them a secret legacy. They didn't have a dusty old store waiting for them. Most of them just had the cold, hard pavement. And that's when another idea started to form in my mind, a seed planted in the newly swept soil of my future. Maybe this place could be more than just a store. Maybe it could be more than just my home. I walked over to the counter and pulled out one of my grandfather's old journals. I turned to a clean page. The sun had almost completely set, and the room was filled with a deep purple twilight. In the dim light, I wrote down the first words of a new plan. A bigger plan. A plan that wasn't just about me anymore. The work was just beginning. This whole journey, this whole story, it's taught me something I think we all need to remember. Home isn't just a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to find it in the most broken down, forgotten corner of the world and pour your own soul into it until it breathes again. It's about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. It's about understanding that the most valuable things we inherit aren't things at all. They're stories. They're sacrifices. They're the love that someone held for us, even when we couldn't see it. My grandfather's love was a fortress, and I've been living inside its walls my whole life without even knowing it. This store is just the physical manifestation of that love. And standing here now, in this place that's slowly coming back to life, I realize he gave me the greatest gift of all, a second chance, a chance to have roots, a chance to belong somewhere. Maybe you're listening to this right now and you feel like I did on that bus, lost, alone, heading somewhere you don't want to go. Maybe you've been told a story about your life, about your family, about your worth, that just doesn't feel true. Maybe you're facing your own version of a developer's offer, an easy way out that means giving up a part of your soul. I want you to know that you have a choice. You always have a choice. You can find your own dusty feed store. It might not be a building. It might be a forgotten dream, a broken relationship you can try to mend, a promise to yourself you never kept. It's that thing that's hard, that thing that requires work and heart, but that thing that is truly yours. The work here is far from over. Vantage Point hasn't gone away. They're just regrouping. The financial struggles are real. Some days the sheer scale of what I'm trying to do is overwhelming, and that old feeling of being a scared kid in over his head creeps back in. But then I read another page of my grandfather's journals. Or Doris from the bank stops by with a sandwich. Or Sal from the hardware store drops off a box of nails he says he didn't need. And I remember that I'm not alone in this fight. My plan, the one I started writing in that journal, it's to turn the upstairs apartment into my home, yes. But it's to turn the store itself into something for the community. A coffee shop, a meeting place, maybe a small market for local farmers. And eventually, a place that can offer a job, a first step, to another kid aging out of the system. A place where someone else can get their second chance. That's the real way to honor my grandfather's legacy. Not just to save his store, but to make it a place of refuge, just like he tried to make it for me. This journey has just begun, and I want to take you on it with me. If this story resonated with you, if it touched some subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're building a community here of people who understand what it means to fight for something real, for something that matters. And I really want to hear from you. That's the most important part. What is the feed store in your life? What is that hard, meaningful thing you've chosen to fight for instead of taking the easy way out? Because your stories matter. Our stories are how we remind each other that we're not alone. Thank you for listening. And now, I've got a